The coat didn't fit right, and Nathan knew it. It was the same charcoal blazer he'd worn to his wife's funeral 3 years ago, and before that, to the closing dinner when he'd sold his first major patent. It had fit fine both times. Now the shoulders pulled slightly when he moved, because he'd been carrying so much weight for so long that even his body had shifted around it. He smoothed the lapel in the rearview mirror, checked that his collar was straight, and reminded himself that today was the kind of day that didn't come twice. On the passenger seat sat a manila folder held shut by a binder clip. Inside were 46 pages of acoustic modeling data, load distribution charts, and what his former professor at Georgia Tech had called the most elegant structural solution to a ventilation problem I've seen in 20 years. Nathan Briggs had been working on those 46 pages, in fragments, between bedtimes and school pickups and grocery runs, for the better part of 14 months. The parking structure attached to Crestfield Group's headquarters had 2 sections. The visitor section was marked clearly with green signage near the entrance. Nathan pulled into it, found a spot on the second level, and sat for a moment with the engine running. He thought about his daughter, Lily. No, he thought about his daughter. She was 7, and she had drawn him a picture that morning of a man in a suit, shaking hands with a tall building. "That's you, Daddy," she'd said, very seriously, handing it to him over her cereal bowl. "You're going to shake the building's hand today." He'd folded it carefully and put it in his breast pocket. He turned the engine off and went inside. What Nathan did not know, as he crossed the lobby toward the reception desk, was that 40 minutes later, the head of security would receive a call that changed the direction of his entire afternoon. And what the woman who made that call did not know was that it would cost her something she could not get back. Crestfield Group occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower in downtown Atlanta. The company had been built on large-scale commercial construction projects, convention centers, airport terminals, transit hubs, and had earned a reputation in the industry for finishing on time and slightly over budget. That second part had become a serious problem 18 months ago, when a major ventilation contract on a stadium retrofit went sideways. The system had been designed by one of the country's top firms. It had failed inspection twice, been partially rebuilt once, and was now sitting idle while Crestfield hemorrhaged penalty fees and legal exposure. 3 engineering consultants had looked at the problem. 2 said it was unfixable, without a complete redesign. 1 submitted a proposal that would have cost more than starting over. Nathan had been brought in through a mutual contact, quietly, 6 weeks earlier. He had asked for the original blueprints, the inspection reports, and the contractor logs. He'd taken them home and spread them across the kitchen table after his daughter went to bed. He'd made coffee. He'd worked until 2 in the morning, 3 nights in a row, with the particular focused silence of a man who has learned to do everything important. After the house goes quiet, what he found was not a design failure. It was a coordination failure. A mismatch between the acoustic modeling assumptions and the actual load-bearing geometry of the upper decks. The ventilation system worked perfectly for the building, the blueprints described. The problem was that the building, as constructed, differed from those blueprints in 11 small ways that individually meant nothing, and collectively meant everything. His solution didn't require a redesign. It required targeted recalibration at 4 junction points, a modified airflow sequence, and a secondary damper configuration that would add less than 3% to the remaining project cost. He had written it all down, he had checked it twice. He had driven 40 minutes to be here at 9 in the morning, because this was the meeting that could change things. Not make him rich exactly, but let him breathe. Pay off what remained of his wife's hospital bills. Stop the quiet, grinding math that ran in the background of every decision he made. Every grocery list, every utility bill, every school field trip permission slip. He checked in at reception, received his visitor badge, and was told the executive suite was on the 31st floor. He thanked the receptionist, and turned toward the elevators. That was when Gwendolyn Marsh walked in. Gwendolyn was 51 years old, and had been chief operating officer of Crestfield Group for 6 years. She was precise in the way that people become precise, when they have survived long enough in a field that punishes mistakes, and she had extended that precision, over time, to everything around her. The way meetings were run, the way reports were formatted. the way the lobby looked when clients arrived. She came through the main entrance at 8:58, 2 minutes before her morning briefing, and she was already moving at the pace of someone who had made a decision before she walked through the door. She noticed the visitor badge on Nathan's jacket. She noticed the manila folder. She noticed, peripherally, that the jacket was slightly wrong for the occasion. Not poorly made, just old, slightly strained at the shoulders, the kind of worn that isn't vintage, just lived in. She also noticed, on her way to the elevator bank, that the second level of the parking structure was visible through the glass atrium wall, and that a dented gray sedan was parked in the visitor section, with what appeared to be a cracked front bumper held in place by zip ties. She didn't know it was Nathan's car, but she made a decision anyway. She stepped to the side before reaching the elevators, took out her phone, and sent a 3-word text to the head of building security: visitor lot. Gray sedan, have it checked. In Gwendolyn's mind, this was not a hostile act, it was a standards act. Crestfield was hosting 2 separate client delegations that morning: a municipal transit authority, and a group of private investors from Dallas. Appearances were not superficial. Appearances were the first communication a company sent to anyone who walked through its doors. She was simply ensuring that communication was consistent. She put her phone away, and took the elevator upstairs. Nathan was on the 31st floor by 9 o'clock, seated in a glass-walled conference room, with a view of downtown Atlanta spread out in every direction. The room was very clean. The chairs were very expensive. 3 members of the Crestfield executive team were already seated when he arrived, and 2 more came in shortly after: the head of legal, the VP of construction operations, a senior project manager who had actually been on site at the stadium and who looked, Nathan thought, like a person who hadn't slept well in some time. He introduced himself, they introduced themselves. He set his folder on the table. Then the door opened and Gwendolyn Marsh came in. She took her seat at the head of the table, with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. Opened her portfolio, capped her pen, looked up, looked at Nathan. Something about his face was familiar, and she couldn't immediately place it. "Mr. Briggs," she said. "Thank you for making the trip." "Of course," he said. She nodded once, then turned to the VP of operations. "Let's begin." Downstairs, the head of security, a man named Phil whose main job was managing access credentials and making sure nobody walked off with a laptop, had received Gwendolyn's text, located the gray sedan, run the plates through the visitor log and found no match. He assumed this meant the vehicle was unauthorized. He radioed the parking management contractor, who called a tow service. The tow service arrived in 11 minutes, which was faster than usual. Nobody knocked on Nathan's folder to say, "Hey, is that your car in the visitor lot, the gray one with the zip ties on the bumper?" Nobody checked the visitor log a second time, which would have shown that Nathan Briggs had indeed signed in at 8:54, listed his vehicle as a 2009 gray Honda Accord, and been assigned visitor spot 2. Spot 2C was where the car was when the tow truck hooked up to it. The car was gone by 9:17. In the conference room on the 31st floor, Nathan was talking. He hadn't begun dramatically. He'd begun the way he always began things, which was quietly and from the beginning. He placed the load distribution chart on the table, oriented it so everyone could see, and said, "The issue isn't the system. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The issue is that it was designed for a building that doesn't exist." The VP of operations blinked. "I'm sorry? The as-built differs from the design documentation in 11 places. None of them are large. Cumulatively, they change the load geometry on the upper decks, enough to create the pressure differential you've been fighting. The system is responding correctly to the wrong inputs." He laid out the inspection reports side by side. He pointed to the discrepancies. Not accusingly, just factually, the way a doctor explains a diagnosis. He showed them where the acoustic modeling had gone wrong, not because the modeler was incompetent, but because the modeler had been working from blueprints that didn't reflect what had actually been built. "These 4 junction points," he said, tapping the chart, "recalibrated, with the modified damper sequence in section 3, the system will pass inspection. I can't give you a timeline I'd stake my name on until I see the actual junction access, but I believe you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks, not 6 to 8 months. The room was quiet for a moment. "And the cost?" the head of legal asked. Rough estimate, contingent on access conditions, somewhere between $340,000 and $420,000, that includes my consulting fee. More quiet, the VP of Operations looked at the chart, then at the inspection reports, then back at the chart. This tracks. Why didn't the other consultants see this? They were looking for design failures, Nathan said. There aren't any. Gwendolyn had not spoken since the presentation began. She was looking at the documentation in front of her with an expression Nathan couldn't entirely read. Not skeptical, not convinced, somewhere in between, which meant she was actually thinking. He appreciated that. Some people in her position stopped actually thinking around year 4. She looked up. What would you need from us to begin? Before Nathan could answer, the conference room door opened. It was Phil from security, which was unusual enough that everyone turned to look at him. He was wearing the expression of a man who has realized in transit that his errand has become more complicated than he expected. He looked at Nathan, then at Gwendolyn, then at Nathan again. Mr. Briggs, he said. Nathan turned. Yes, Phil cleared his throat. I need to let you know, there's been a situation with your vehicle, in the visitor lot. The way the room changed in the next 15 seconds would be difficult to describe precisely, but everyone present would remember it. It wasn't loud, nobody shouted. It was more like the air pressure changed. Something in the quality of the silence shifted when Phil finished explaining, and Gwendolyn understood what had happened. Her text, her instruction, his car, the visitor who was at this moment presenting a solution that 3 other consultants had failed to find, and which would save Crestfield somewhere between $3 and $5 million in ongoing penalties, legal exposure, and remediation costs. That visitor's car had been towed. On her instruction, because it had a cracked bumper. Nathan looked at Phil for a long moment, not angry exactly, just absorbing it, the specific, familiar weight of it. The way a thing like this lands differently when it's the latest in a long line of similar things. When you are tired, and you drove 40 minutes, and you have 46 pages in a folder, and there is a drawing in your breast pocket of you shaking hands with a building, and someone has still looked at your car, and decided you don't belong here. All right, he said quietly. What do I need to do to get it back? Phil told him. The towing company was about 4 miles away. The release fee was $175. They'd need to process it through the management contractor, which would take. I can cover the release fee, said the head of legal immediately. We'll have someone drive you, said the VP of operations. No, Nathan said it without sharpness, just clearly, I'll handle it. Can we finish the meeting first? I need to pick up my daughter at 3. The room was silent. Gwendolyn looked down at the table, not at the documentation, just at the table. It was the first time in the meeting that she had looked at something with no strategic purpose. Just looked. Mr. Briggs, she said. He waited. She didn't reach for the polished corporate language. She didn't frame it as a miscommunication, or an operational error, or a situation that had been flagged and addressed. She said, I made that call, I saw your car in the lot, and I made a judgment I should not have made. I am sorry, that was wrong. Nathan looked at her for a moment. Thank you for saying that, he said. Then he picked up his pen. Can we talk about the timeline? They talked about the timeline. They talked about site access and crew coordination, and the specific documentation Crestfield would need to provide. They talked about liability and indemnification in language. The head of legal was clearly pleased to have available. They talked about what 6 to 8 weeks looked like against the penalty schedule, and the answer was, considerably better than what they'd been looking at. An hour after Phil had come through the door, Nathan closed his folder, clipped his pen to the outside, and stood. I'll have a formal proposal to you by end of week, he said. Once you've had a chance to review it, we can talk contract terms. 4 people in the room nodded at the same time, which he didn't notice because he was already thinking about the logistics of the afternoon. Gwendolyn stood as well. I'll have someone from our facilities team coordinate the towing release. They can handle the fee and the pickup directly. You won't need to make the trip. I appreciate that, and Mr. Briggs. She paused. I'd like to include a formal letter of apology in whatever documentation package we send you, not for the record, just because it's the right thing to do. He thought for a second, then he nodded once. Okay, Phil, who was still standing near the door looking like he wished he'd chosen a different career, held it open as Nathan walked out. The elevator ride down was quiet. Nathan stood alone in it, watching the floor numbers drop, and he thought about his daughter's drawing. The man in the suit shaking the building's hand, she'd drawn his tie as a zigzag, bright orange, because she thought he should wear more color. He was not, he realized, going to be able to explain to a 7-year-old exactly what had happened today in any way she would fully understand. But he could tell her he shook the building's hand. That part was true. The lobby was busy by the time he reached it. The transit authority delegation had arrived. A cluster of people in lanyards, moving toward the elevator bank, with the organized uncertainty of a group that had been briefed too recently. Nathan stepped around them and pushed through the glass doors into the morning heat. His car wasn't there, obviously, but a Crestfield facilities coordinator named Jerry was waiting on the sidewalk with a company car, a printed release form, and a slightly apologetic expression. Jerry had clearly been briefed on the situation in some detail, because he didn't ask any questions, just said, "Mr. Briggs, I've got everything you need." Nathan got in. The car was released, refueled by Jerry's insistence, and driven back to the Crestfield building. Jerry parked it in a reserved spot on the ground level, the kind with a small sign that said "Executive Visitor," and handed Nathan the parking pass to put on the dashboard. Nathan looked at the pass for a moment. He put it on the dashboard. He sat in the car for a minute with the engine off. In the quiet that comes after something difficult and something hopeful have both happened in the same morning. The folder was on the seat beside him. The drawing was still in his pocket. Outside, through the windshield, the glass tower reflected the sky in a way that made it look like there was no building there at all, just more sky. He had a lot of work ahead of him. 14 months of middle-of-the-night kitchen table work had produced 46 pages and a meeting. The meeting had produced a contract conversation. The contract would produce months of site work, coordination calls, the specific exhausting labor of solving a problem that was real and complicated, and his to carry. He would be tired. He was already tired. But there was a different quality to the tiredness now, not the kind that piles up with no destination. The kind that has somewhere to go. He picked up his phone and called his sister, who was picking up his daughter from school that day. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "Pretty well," he said. "Pretty well or pretty well?" He was quiet for a second. The second one. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a small cry of relief. He understood it completely. "Tell her I'll be there by 4, he said. "Tell her the building, tell her it went the way she drew it." 6 weeks later, the formal consulting agreement between Nathan Briggs and Crestfield Group was signed in the same conference room on the 31st floor. The number on the contract was larger than what had been discussed in the original meeting, because the scope review had confirmed his estimates were conservative. The head of legal had pushed for a performance bonus clause tied to inspection approval. Nathan had agreed to it. He paid off the last of the hospital debt the following Monday. He did not make a ceremony out of it. He sat at the kitchen table, after his daughter was asleep, opened the billing portal, entered his account information, and clicked submit. Then he closed the laptop and sat there in the quiet for a while. His daughter had taped the drawing to the refrigerator. The man in the orange zigzag tie, shaking hands with the building. She had added something since the morning he'd left for the meeting. A small figure, standing next to the man, about half his height, with a large round head, and what appeared to be a cape. "Is that you?" he'd asked her. "Obviously," she'd said. He looked at it for a long time in the quiet of the kitchen, the man, the building, the small caped figure, the orange tie. Then he got up, refilled his water glass and went to bed. The stadium project passed inspection 9 weeks after the recalibration work began. 2 weeks ahead of the revised schedule. Crestfield issued a press release about it that mentioned innovative recalibration methodology and expert third-party consultation. Nathan's name wasn't in it, which was fine with him. He wasn't doing it to be in press releases. Gwendolyn Marsh did in fact send the letter of apology. It arrived in an envelope with the Crestfield letterhead, 2 pages, handwritten on the second half, not the first half. The first half was professional language. The second half was a person writing about what it means to mistake a symbol for a reality. About what her mother had driven, and what her mother had been. About how the habits of a high-speed career can flatten the edges off a person's until they forget what the edges were for. Nathan read it twice. Then he put it in a drawer where he kept things he wanted to keep. He still drove the same car, not because he couldn't afford something newer now. He could, eventually, if he was careful. But the car ran, it got him where he needed to go. And some things, once you've carried them far enough, start to feel less like burdens and more like evidence. Evidence that you showed up, that you kept going, that you drove 40 minutes with 46 pages and a drawing in your pocket and walked into a glass tower and did the thing you came to do. His daughter had recently decided the car needed a name. She'd been considering options for 2 weeks with the gravity of someone naming a planet. "Chester," she announced one morning, buckling her seatbelt. "Chester," he repeated. "He looks like a Chester." Nathan looked at the dashboard, the cracked plastic, the faded display, the faint smell of old coffee and something indefinably familiar. "Yeah," he said. "He kind of does." He pulled out of the driveway and headed toward school, and the morning opened up ahead of them the way mornings do. Full of ordinary things, and underneath the ordinary things, the quiet, unremarkable miracle of a day with somewhere to be.